Hey guys, tonight we step into the cool, stony silence of the medieval world. A place where echoes live longer than people, and every torch flicker writes trembling shadows on the walls. You're standing at the base of a massive fortress, the kind that looks carved straight from the bones of the earth. The night is quiet, except for the soft sigh of wind curling through arrow slits and the faint drip of water sliding down moss, darkened mortar. You can almost taste the cold iron of the portcullis above your head. You're here to explore the genius design of medieval castles, their brains, bones, and secrets. But don't get too cocky. You probably wouldn't survive an hour here. Between the lice, the smoke, and the occasional crossbow bolt, it's not exactly luxury real estate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk up the uneven stone path that winds toward the castle gate, your boots, or rather, the boots you imagine, scraping over gravel that's been trampled for centuries. Each step echoes faintly, as if you're trespassing through time itself. Above you, towers lean in like silent giants, their crowns lost against the starlit sky. The air carries the scent of wet stone and faint smoke. You can hear something distant. The low murmur of guards changing posts, the metallic clink of chainmail shifting under cloaks. Castles weren't built to be cozy. They were born from paranoia and power. Imagine a world without police, no central army, no emergency hotline. Just you, your sword, and whoever's loyal enough not to stab you while you sleep. That's the medieval mindset. Safety wasn't a given. It was engineered. Every inch of this fortress you're imagining, every gate, every stair, every little slit in the wall, was designed to keep someone out, or sometimes, to keep someone in. You step closer to the outer wall. It's enormous. More than 30 feet high, and so thick you could park a horse cart on top. The stones aren't uniform, not yet polished into perfection. They're raw, rough, hewn, still scarred from the quarry. The wall breathes cold air like a sleeping creature. You press your hand to the surface. It's damp, gritty, and ancient, older than most family trees, older than the town that probably grew up in its shadow. People often think of castles as just big stone houses, but they were more like statements written in architecture. You didn't just build one, you declared it. It said, "This land is mine," in a language everyone could understand, even if they couldn't read a single word. Above you, on the parapet, a guard leans lazily on his spear. His silhouette cuts a sharp line against the moonlight. He's bored, probably cold, definitely underpaid. You can almost hear his thoughts wondering when his watch will end, or whether his wife remembered to save him some oil. Medieval life had a lot of waiting. Waiting for enemies, waiting for dawn, waiting for your lord to notice you existed. Still, the design of this place was pure genius. The entrance path curves deliberately. That's not an accident. It's a psychological weapon. Attackers would have to approach from an awkward angle, exposing their weaker side. You can picture it now, a swarm of soldiers trudging uphill, shields up, arrows raining down from murder holes above, boiling oil dripping like some culinary nightmare. Every inch of their path carefully calculated to make them suffer. And then, there's the sound. The interior acoustics of a castle aren't quiet. They're designed to carry. Footsteps, whispers, even the sound of armor shifting echoes across courtyards and corridors. It's not hard to imagine why. If someone sneaks in at night, you want to hear them. You want the place itself to betray them. Inside, it's colder than outside. That's another surprise. You'd think all that stone would trap heat, but no. It holds on to chill like it's in love with it. That's why tapestries weren't just for decoration. They were insulation, soundproofing, and, let's be honest, medieval wallpaper all in one. Your eyes adjust to the dim torchlight flickering along the inner wall. The flames dance over a series of carvings, coats of arms, grim faces, a lion swallowing a serpent. Each symbol tells a story, some of victory, some of ambition, some of fear. A noble's entire reputation was built into this stonework. You could lose a battle, but heaven forbid your castle look unimpressive. Historians still argue whether the earliest castles were built more for defense or display. Some say they were fortresses first and symbols later. Others argue the opposite. That power was as much about being seen as being safe. Maybe it was both. After all, a castle had to look undefeatable, even if it secretly leaked rainwater into the Great Hall. And oh, those great halls. You'll get there soon. But first, linger here, in the outer courtyard. You can hear horses shifting in the stables, the smell of hay and manure thick in the air. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammers away, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang of metal on metal echoing through the night. It's strangely soothing, almost like a metronome for the Middle Ages. Every castle, no matter how small, was its own little city. There were kitchens, chapels, storerooms, dungeons, gardens, even breweries. People lived and worked here, not just nobles, but cooks, stable hands, masons, washerwomen, children, even animals. The place had a pulse. You can almost hear it, beating under the surface, steady and ancient. The castle's design wasn't just about survival, it was about control. If you lived inside, your life revolved around hierarchy. The lord at the top, knights below, servants below them, and finally you, if you were lucky enough to be let through the gates at all. Even the stairs remind you of that. They spiral clockwise, so a right-handed defender could swing freely downward, while an attacker climbing up would struggle to fight. You're not just walking through stone, you're walking through a masterclass in psychological design. One quirky fact: some castles had garderobes, bathrooms, that emptied straight into the moat below. Which means, yes, that picturesque moat you see in fairy tales was often less than romantic. Imagine storming the castle through a trench that doubles as the local sewage system. You'd need a lot more than courage. You'd need a very poor sense of smell. But step back now. Look up once more. The moonlight catches the jagged lines of the battlements. Each notch, each tooth in that silhouette, is part of a conversation between fear and ambition. You can almost feel the architects thinking, how do we make this both terrifying and beautiful? How do we make a home out of a weapon? Somewhere behind you, a bell rings softly, the watch changing again. The night deepens, the torches hiss and sputter, and you find yourself oddly calm. The weight of history presses close, but it's not heavy. It's comforting. Somehow, you realize that for all their paranoia, these builders also created something profoundly peaceful in its endurance. The stones have seen sieges, fires, celebrations, and ghosts of laughter that still linger in the corridors. As you trace your fingers along a crack in the wall, you can almost hear whispers of the past, folded neatly between the layers of mortar. We were here. We built this. We mattered. And you, centuries later, walking in imagination, are part of that echo. You take one last breath of the cool, mossy air and glance toward the wooden gatehouse. Beyond it lies the moat, the raised mound where the first castles began. You'll climb there next, into the world of wood, earth, and ingenuity that laid the foundation for everything that followed. The night is long, the fire low, and the story's just beginning. You cross the inner courtyard, your boots crunching over gravel, mixed with centuries of dust and lost buttons, and move toward the older heart of the fortress. The moat. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just a steep mound of earth topped by a wooden tower. But this humble hill is where the entire age of castles began. Before the thunder of stone, before the echo of cathedral-sized keeps, there was mud, timber, and imagination. You start to climb, step by step, feeling the incline pull at your legs. The slope is sharp enough that if it rained last night, you'd be on your back faster than you can say feudalism. The air smells of damp grass and soil, fresh, earthy, the scent of beginnings. From up here, the world spreads out around you like a patchwork quilt of fields and distant smoke. It's easier to see why people chose heights like these to build their strongholds. The higher you were, the longer you lived. Historians still argue whether the motte and bailey design came from the Franks, the Normans, or was a pan-European evolution. But one thing's certain, by the 11th century, they were popping up like mushrooms after rain. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066, his army reportedly threw up over 80 of them in less than a decade. Think about that. Wooden fortresses rising almost overnight. Each one a loud declaration that said, "We're in charge now." You reach the top, your imaginary breath coming in little puffs of cold air. The wind up here is stronger. It whistles through the timbers of the palisade that circles the mound. Inside stands a simple wooden tower square, rough, and creaking softly in the breeze. It smells faintly of pitch, sap, and old smoke. You can almost hear the distant shouts of workers hammering planks together, the rhythmic thunk of mallets driving stakes into hard-packed earth. It's not glamorous. The walls leak, the roof smokes, and the draft sneaks through every crack. But in its time, this little wooden keep was revolutionary. Before this, most people relied on hill forts or stone city walls. The motte and bailey castle was different. It was personal, portable, adaptable. Lords could claim a patch of land, build one in weeks, and suddenly control everything within sight. It was like dropping a medieval Wi-Fi router of power. Instant connection to dominance. You step into the tower. The floorboards groan under your weight, and dust dances in the air. The space inside is tight, barely enough room for a table, a chair, and a bed that looks like a punishment for bad posture. But here's the genius. The height of the motte turned even a modest fort into a beacon. Soldiers stationed up here could spot an approaching enemy from miles away, giving the lord below time to muster defenses, or to flee. Below the motte lies the bailey, the larger, flatter enclosure surrounded by a wooden fence. This was the busy part: workshops, stables, kitchens, even tiny chapels, all huddled together like nervous peasants. Chickens cluck, dogs bark, and smoke rises lazily from cooking fires. You can imagine the smell, a mix of roasted meat, unwashed humanity, and wood smoke that seeps into every tunic. The separation between motte and bailey wasn't just practical, it was social. The lord and his immediate family stayed up on the motte, safe and elevated, while everyone else lived and worked down in the bailey. It was hierarchy in physical form. Even in architecture, the Middle Ages made sure you knew your place. One quirky fact: many of these wooden castles were deliberately burned down. Sounds counterproductive, right? But after an attack, if a lord knew he couldn't hold the fort, he might torch it himself to deny the enemy shelter. It was the medieval version of, "If I can't have it, nobody can." You lean over the wooden railing and look down. The slope is so steep it almost feels alive, like the earth is breathing. It's reinforced with clay and grass, sometimes even logs packed horizontally to stop erosion. And at the base, a ditch glistens faintly with standing water. A proto-moat, not yet the grand aquatic defenses of later centuries, but the ancestor of them all. As you look out over the bailey, it's impossible not to feel how alive these places must have been. The smith pounding out horseshoes, the cook stirring a pot over the fire, children chasing each other between piles of hay, soldiers sharpening swords, and above it all, the Lord's banner snapping in the wind. It wasn't romantic, but it was home, and it worked. But wood doesn't last forever. Within a generation, many motte and Bailey castles were rebuilt in stone. Wood rotted, burned easily, and sagged under rain. Stone, though, it promised eternity. The transformation from timber to stone marks one of the most fascinating architectural leaps in history. It wasn't just about materials, it was about mentality. A wooden fort says, "I'm surviving." A stone castle says, "I'm ruling." Still, the wooden origins left their fingerprints on every later design. Take the curved earthworks, the concentric defenses, the idea of separating layers of safety. Those all began here. Even the rhythm of medieval life, guard shifts, curfews, bells ringing through the fog, was first choreographed in wooden towers like this one. You rest your elbows on the railing and watch as the sky deepens into night. A torch flares below. Someone's calling out in Norman French. Sharp syllables carried by the wind. You can almost hear the gossip that would have filled the airs. Who's marrying whom? Which knight got drunk again? Whether the local peasants are secretly plotting rebellion. Historians still debate whether the mott's height was more symbolic than strategic. Some argue it was meant to show authority rather than actually protect it. After all, a good trebuchet could flatten one of these wooden towers in an afternoon, but others insist the high ground was everything: visibility, defense, intimidation. Maybe it was both. Like so much of medieval life, practicality and theatre went hand in hand. If you were standing here in the 12th century, you'd probably feel proud but uneasy. The view is magnificent. The fields stretch endlessly. The smoke from a distant village rises like a quiet prayer. But there's always that hint of danger. Somewhere beyond the horizon, someone's building a bigger mound, a taller tower, a sharper spear. Power in this world was always temporary, no matter how high you built it. A soft rain begins to fall. It patters against the wooden planks, seeps into the soil, and runs down the slope of the motte. You can almost feel the earth drinking it, holding it, remembering it. Water and time, those are the true rulers here. They erode everything, eventually, even kings. You take one last slow turn around the top, listening to the faint creak of the tower in the wind. In a few centuries, this will all be gone, collapsed, replaced by stone. The wooden palisade will rot, the ditches will fill, and grass will grow over what was once a fortress. But the idea will remain. Every castle that comes after will carry a bit of this hill in its bones. As you descend, your boots sink slightly into the damp earth. The torches flicker below like grounded stars. The Bailey waits, its low fences and muddy lanes alive with ghostly echoes of work and laughter. Ahead, rising from the darkness, you can already see the faint outline of something new, stronger, colder, more permanent. Stone walls, rising where timber once stood. You're leaving behind the world of improvisation and entering one of endurance. The next step in this story is heavier, harder, and infinitely more ambitious. You brush the mud from your boots, glance once more up at the modest moat that started it all, and walk toward the half-built walls of a new age. The smell of wet mortar greets you first, chalky, sharp, and strangely satisfying. You step toward the rising skeleton of stone walls, half-built, half-ruined by time's imagination. What once was timber now gleams with the grey confidence of quarried rock. You can feel it immediately. This is no temporary stronghold. This is ambition in physical form. You pass a pile of stones waiting to be hoisted, each one roughly shaped by hand. They're heavier than they look. Some are so large that a single block takes 10 men and 2 oxen to move. The builders chant as they work, a low rhythm to match their muscle. Grunting, lifting, balancing. The sound of chisels biting into stone is hypnotic, a kind of medieval ASMR, steady and relentless. This is where the genius of design truly begins to sharpen. The motte and Bailey had heart, but the curtain walls and gatehouses. These are where the mind takes over. Everything here is geometry, psychology, and intimidation welded into architecture. You step through the half-finished gatehouse, ducking under a timber scaffold. The space opens up around you, and you immediately notice how deliberate it all feels. The walls are angled thick and high enough to make you dizzy when you look up. Every arch, every stair, every slot for a future door is part of a grand defensive bullet. And at the center of it all, this humble passage you're standing in is a murder machine disguised as an entrance. Let's talk about the gatehouse. The medieval front door. It's equal parts welcome mat and death trap. Visitors would enter through a heavy wooden gate, reinforced with iron bands. Beyond that, if they were invited, they'd find themselves in a narrow stone corridor known as the gate passage. It looks harmless until you notice the ceiling, small rectangular holes cut deep into the stone. Murder holes. You tilt your head up. Imagine boiling oil, molten lead, or just good old-fashioned rocks raining down from those openings. If an enemy somehow broke through the first door, they'd be stuck in this stone throat, roasting, panicking, and probably regretting life choices. And even if they survived that, the portcullis, the iron grill that drops from above, would slam down like a guillotine. It's not just a wall, it's a psychological experience. Historians still argue whether these murder holes were as deadly as legend claims. Some say they were mostly for intimidation, a kind of early psychological warfare with more smoke than actual fire. Others insist they were as effective as the history books suggest, noting that even the bravest soldiers tended to hesitate when hot oil poured onto their helmets. You can decide which version you prefer. The more you walk, the more the castle reveals its brain. The curtain walls, the long stretches connecting towers, are angled slightly inward, forming a kind of visual funnel. From below, it feels like the walls lean over you, threatening to collapse forward. That wasn't accidental. Architects wanted invaders to feel small, suffocated, insignificant. Power through perspective. You run your hand along the rough surface of the wall. It's cool and damp, flecked with lichen. The masons used lime mortar, sand, and sometimes even animal blood to strengthen it. No one wanted to admit that medieval engineering sometimes involved literal sacrifice, but a few extra ingredients were believed to make a wall last longer. One chronicler even claimed that builders occasionally mixed milk into the mortar for smoother consistency. Basically, the world's least appetizing milkshake. You step out into the courtyard beyond the gatehouse, where scaffolding climbs along the inner curtain wall. Ropes creak, pulleys groan, and somewhere above you, a mason whistles off-key. This was the daily soundtrack of progress work, grit, and a whole lot of shouting. Look closely at the wall, and you'll see the genius hidden in the pattern. The stones aren't uniform. There's method in the irregularity. The larger blocks at the bottom provide weight and strength, while smaller stones fill gaps, locking everything together. It's like a puzzle solved vertically, one aching muscle at a time. Another detail catches your eye, tiny slits carved into the outer wall, barely a few inches wide. They look decorative, almost pretty, until you realize their purpose. Arrow loops. From inside, an archer could see everything. From outside, you could barely spot the glint of a bowstring. You move closer and peek through one. The view outside is framed like a painting. A strip of rolling hills and distant trees. The slit flares inward into a wide cone, allowing the archer maximum aim and visibility, while keeping him nearly invisible from the outside. It's such a small detail, yet it encapsulates medieval design philosophy: perfectly control the angle, control the outcome. And then there's the battlement. Those iconic notches along the top of the wall. The word, crenellation, comes to mind. The alternating high and low sections called merlons and crenels. From here, defenders could duck, shoot, duck again. You can imagine them up there, wind howling, arrows flying, shouting orders across the wall walk. It's part warfare, part choreography. A quirky tidbit. In some kingdoms, crenellations were a legal privilege. You couldn't just decide to have those fancy castle tops. You needed the king's permission. A license to crenellate. Without it, your castle was basically breaking zoning laws for nobility. Imagine today needing a royal permit to install a home security system. As you walk along the inner path, the gatehouse looms behind you, and you start to see how layered everything is. One wall leads to another, one defense hides behind the next. Even if attackers broke through, they'd find themselves trapped again, funneled into smaller and smaller spaces. It's the architectural equivalent of saying, "Come in, if you dare," and then slamming 20 more doors in their face. The entire castle is a maze of control, of movement, sound, and visibility. Corridors twist at odd angles to confuse unfamiliar guests. Stairs spiral upward to favor right-handed defenders. Windows are positioned to let in light but not arrows. Even acoustics play a role. Shouts and footsteps echo in ways that can both alert guards and intimidate intruders. You stop at a corner where two curtain walls meet. The air is colder here, shaded, almost still. The corner tower above you feels alive, its presence pressing down like a watchful eye. You can picture the guards posted up there, wrapped in cloaks, scanning the horizon for any hint of smoke or movement. The brilliance of this design lies not just in stone, but in psychology. It doesn't just protect the people inside, it performs safety. From a distance, even before you reach the gate, you feel its message. This place is untouchable. Yet, for all its might, a castle wasn't indestructible. Fire, betrayal, or simple neglect could undo it. That's the paradox. Every wall ever built to last forever eventually becomes a ruin. But while it stood, it was a marvel of human ingenuity. Part science, part superstition, all ambition. As the sun dips below the horizon, shadows creep across the courtyard, and torches begin to glow in the embrasures. Their light flickers against the stone, giving it the illusion of breathing. Like the castle itself is alive, dreaming in heat and shadow. You take one last slow walk along the wall walk, feeling the uneven stones underfoot. You pause by an arrow slit, look out over the darkening landscape, and realize how much the world has changed because of places like this. Castles didn't just defend, they defined. They drew borders, inspired stories, and shaped entire kingdoms. And yet, beyond the walls, you can already sense the next evolution waiting. The keep, the heart of the whole structure, is rising in the distance, a tower within the fortress. A home, a prison, a throne. The place where fear, pride, and survival all lived under the same roof. The night wind hums through the gaps in the stone, whispering its timeless truth. The higher you build, the more you have to protect. You step into the heart of the fortress now, the keep. The air changes as you cross the threshold, cool and still, as if sound itself hesitates before entering. The space is vast, but not empty. It smells faintly of iron and smoke, of tallow candles burning low. You can hear your own footsteps echo softly, a reminder that you're no longer outside in the world of wind and siege engines, but inside something heavier, a vault of power, a monument to the medieval idea of permanence. This is the Great Keep, the stone soul of the castle. From the outside, it looks almost brutal, thick, walled, angular, a giant stone cube planted squarely in the earth. Inside, though, the genius of its design becomes clear. Every inch of it is deliberate, functional, and deeply symbolic. The keep wasn't just a house, it was a message. It said, "Here lives someone who cannot be moved." You move slowly through the great hall on the ground floor, your fingers brushing against the cool, slightly damp wall. These stones have seen hundreds of winters. They've absorbed laughter, arguments, prayers, and secrets. The hall itself feels like a hybrid of living room, courtroom, and fortress. A long wooden table dominates the center, scarred from years of use. It's where meals were served, disputes settled, and alliances negotiated. The walls are hung with faded tapestries, hunting scenes, battles, saints. Their colors have dimmed to a sleepy murk, like dreams remembered half wrong. The only light comes from narrow slit windows that cut thin, bright blades into the gloom. You wander toward the fireplace, large enough to roast an ox. The soot-stained stone rises to a chimney that could swallow you whole. Fireplaces like this weren't just about warmth. They were the theater of comfort, proof that the Lord could command fire as easily as men. In a world where most people's heating system was a smoky hearth in a one-room hut, a roaring fire like this was luxury and authority rolled into one. Historians still argue whether keeps were primarily defensive structures or symbols of feudal control. On one hand, the design screams defense, narrow stairways, thick walls, small openings. But on the other, the sheer show of it, the height, the craftsmanship, the visible expense, suggests they were just as much about being seen. Maybe the truth lies in between. Medieval lords didn't build for comfort. They built for legacy. You climb a narrow spiral staircase, your hand sliding along a smooth groove carved by centuries of fingers. The stair turns clockwise, always giving the upper defender the advantage. The steps are uneven, intentionally so, just enough to trip up anyone who doesn't know them by heart. It's clever, cruel, and deeply human all at once. Halfway up, you pause at a small landing and peer through a narrow window slit. From here, you can see the entire courtyard below. Workers moving like ants, smoke curling from the kitchens, guards pacing along the walls. The keep was designed for this perspective. It turned the Lord's gaze into an act of surveillance, centuries before security cameras existed. Power here wasn't just owned. It was constantly watched. You reach the upper hall, where the real life of the noble family unfolded. The light is gentler up here. Candles flicker against plastered walls, and the floorboards creak softly beneath woven rush mats. A large bed sits beneath a canopy, thick curtains to hold in warmth and privacy. You can almost smell the faint sweetness of lavender sachets tucked into the sheets, a luxury to fight the scent of smoke, sweat, and wet wool. Beside the bed, a small chest sits locked with an iron clasp. Inside, if you were to peek, there might be fine linen, coins, maybe even a few pieces of jewelry. Or nothing, but folded letters, brittle with age. The medieval world was full of secrets locked in boxes. A maid passes silently in your imagination, her wooden shoes soft on the rushes. She carries a pitcher of water drawn from the well in the courtyard. The Lord's wife sits near the window, embroidering by the faint light, her fingers pale and deft. The rhythm of her needle matches the sound of rain against the stone. You realize that for all the grandeur, life inside the keep was slow, repetitive, sometimes unbearably quiet. One quirky fact: many keeps had no proper bathrooms. Instead, they had garderobes, narrow side chambers with a stone bench, and a chute that led straight outside. And yes, that chute sometimes emptied into the moat. The smell wasn't exactly fit for royalty, but it was better than chamber pots sloshing through corridors. Some archaeologists even think people used herbs or straw to freshen the experience, a primitive kind of medieval air freshener. Still, there were moments of strange elegance. At night, the great hall would glow with torchlight and the shimmer of metal goblets, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat, mead, and candle smoke. Minstrels would play soft tunes on the rebec or the harp. Laughter would ripple through the room. Loud, unguarded. The kind of laughter that sounds different in a stone room, because the echoes seem to join in. But beneath the merriment, there was always tension. Castles weren't peaceful homes, they were stages for status. Who sat closest to the Lord's table? Who got the second best chair? Who spoke first? Every detail was a silent negotiation of hierarchy. You move toward the solar, the private chamber of the Lord and Lady. It's warmer here, more intimate. The windows are slightly larger, the cushions softer. A chessboard rests on a side table, the pieces carved from ivory and jet. You can imagine them sitting here in the evening, playing slowly, each move a metaphor for real politics outside the walls. Historians still debate whether keeps were truly comfortable places to live. Some say they were more prisons than palaces, built to impress rather than to nurture. Others argue that within their constraints, they were the safest, coziest spaces of their time. You can almost see both sides, the grandeur and the gloom balancing each other like light and shadow. At the top of the keep, you find the rooftop walk. The air rushes around you, cool and sharp. From here, the world unfolds in every direction. Villages, forests, fields, rivers, all radiating outward from this stone heart. It's easy to see why medieval lords loved their views. From this height, the world looked orderly, peaceful even. But look closely, and you'll notice the details, the distant smoke of peasant fires, the glint of helmets on patrol, the thin ribbon of a dirt road snaking toward another lord's domain. The landscape wasn't peaceful. It was fragile. Every alliance temporary. Every truce one bad harvest away from collapse. The keep's walls didn't just keep enemies out, they kept fear in. You stand there for a while, feeling the stone under your hands, the wind tugging at your cloak. The keep hums with quiet energy, its weight pressing down through every layer of history. These towers have seen weddings, births, betrayals, fires, sieges. They've been painted with banners and blackened with soot. And through it all, they've endured. There's something hauntingly beautiful about that. These walls don't speak, but they remember. As dusk falls, the torches below begin to glow again, little constellations flickering in the courtyard. You can hear faint music rising, a lute, maybe, or just the rhythm of hammers finishing a day's work. You take one last look across the horizon, then descend slowly down the spiral stair, the sound of your boots echoing like the turning of centuries. Ahead lies the next marvel, the towers, arrow slits, and angles that made these castles not just homes but weapons in stone form. You'll walk those battlements next, tracing the thin line between beauty and brutality carved into every wall. Night falls over the castle like ink poured over parchment. You are still within the fortress walls, moving now toward the outer towers. The points where architecture meets vigilance, where beauty surrenders to function. The stones here are colder, touched by the wind from every direction. The torches sputter in their brackets, their flames bending and straightening in rhythmic defiance. You pause under an archway, looking up at a massive tower silhouetted against the darkening sky. It rises in clean, unbroken lines, round, strong, almost arrogant in its simplicity. You can see why the medieval mind adored towers. They were the purest expression of ambition turned to stone. To build upward was to challenge both nature and God, and to succeed was proof of divine favor. This one is a moat tower, the earliest kind, a solid, vertical keep built upon an artificial mound of earth. The mound itself was called a moat, and it was usually ringed with a wooden palisade and a dry or water-filled ditch. These early fortresses were fast to build, sometimes in a matter of weeks, and though crude, they were potent symbols of authority. Imagine a Norman lord riding into a conquered village, setting men to dig, hauling timbers, driving stakes. Within days, the landscape itself would change, and the people below would look up to see power made visible. But later towers became works of art as much as strategy. By the 13th century, the rounded shell keep emerged, then the grand drum towers and gatehouses of Edwardian castles. You move closer to one now. A great cylindrical tower at the castle's corner. The entrance is small and high, deliberately awkward. A wooden ladder or removable stair would have once led up to it, easily drawn away in times of attack. Every feature here was designed to make an invader's life miserable. You climb the narrow stairs inside, your footsteps echoing upward in slow, spiral rhythm. Each step curves left, clockwise again, because most attackers were right-handed. Defenders descending the stair would have their sword arms free, while invaders were cramped against the inner wall. The architects thought of everything: angles, visibility, choke points. Every stair was a subtle trap. Halfway up, you stop at a small landing where a torch burns low. There's an arrow slit beside it, a long, narrow opening flaring wider on the inside. You look through it, and the world outside appears framed like a painting, moonlight on the grass, shadows of the curtain wall, the dark curve of the moat. The slit is barely wide enough for your fingers, but a longbow could fire through it easily. The field of vision was designed like a cone, narrow from the outside, generous from the inside. The defenders could see everything, aim precisely, and yet remain nearly invisible. There's an old word for these slits: embrasures or loopholes. Both are beautiful in their own way. You think about how they've given us modern metaphors. A loophole, in law, a narrow view, in argument. Everything from battle to language still carries the imprint of castle walls. Higher still, you reach the guard chamber. It's a small circular room with stone benches built into the walls. You imagine the soldiers here, half asleep in the cold, wrapped in cloaks, their armor leaning against the wall beside them. A small brazier glows in the corner, filling the space with flickering red light. The air would be thick with smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of old leather. Outside, the wind would whistle through the slit windows, bringing with it the scent of rain and ash. They would talk quietly, those men, about home, about wages, about rumors of war. They'd sharpen blades with slow, repetitive strokes or mend a broken strap with cold, cracked fingers. You can almost hear the rhythm of their voices, steady, low, human. One might have been a veteran from another siege, telling stories of ladders that broke under flaming arrows, of boiling pitch poured down from the battlements. Another, just a boy, might have listened wide-eyed, half proud, half terrified, for all the grandeur of castles. It was often boys like him who died defending them, anonymous in stone corridors, their stories lost in the mortar. You continue upward, emerging at last onto the battlements. The night air hits you full in the face, sharp and clean. You're standing atop the tower now, high above the courtyard. The moonlight paints everything in shades of silver and blue. From here, you can see the entire castle laid out below, walls, towers, inner ward, all like the gears of a vast machine. To your left, the parapet runs along the wall, lined with merlons and crenels. You know this as the classic battlement shape, the sawtooth pattern every child draws when they sketch a castle. The tall parts, merlons, provided cover. The gaps, crenels, allowed archers to shoot. It's a simple, perfect rhythm of protection and aggression. You step forward and rest your hands on the cold stone. It's rough under your palms, weathered by centuries of wind. You think of the countless sentries who stood here before you. Men who watched the same horizon, scanning for the same faint movement that could mean life or death. You see it now as they did the faint shimmer of the river, the dark smudge of the forest, the flicker of torchlight along the road. Some nights, there would be nothing, just silence, the sound of wind, the occasional hoot of an owl, the creak of leather armor. Those nights were long and heavy, but the men would stand their posts, because to fall asleep was to die. But then there were the other nights, the ones where the alarm bell rang. You imagine it now, the sudden clanging of the tocsin, the shout of voices below, the rapid thunder of boots on stone, flames flaring in the gatehouse, horns echoing off the hills, arrows whistling through the air, a siege in motion. You can almost feel the chaos, the tension of bowstrings, the bark of orders, the smell of smoke and oil. Below, the drawbridge would rise, chains grinding, while above, defenders poured sand, stones, or even molten lead through murder holes. The towers became living creatures then, breathing fire, roaring defiance. But most sieges didn't end in grand battles. They ended in hunger. Months of waiting, watching the enemy camp outside your walls, counting dwindling stores of grain, boiling leather for soup. People think castles made their owners invincible. In truth, they made them prisoners. You lean against the parapet, looking down again at the sleeping courtyard. Tonight, it's peaceful. No torches beyond the walls, no horns, no siege fires. Just the steady rhythm of a fortress breathing in its sleep. You notice something small. A cat moving along the wall, slipping through shadows. Even in these places of violence and grandeur, life carried on. Cats, dogs, sparrows nesting in arrow slits, moss blooming between stones. The castle may have been a weapon, but it was also an ecosystem, a vertical village, alive in strange and quiet ways. A gust of wind rises, tugging at your cloak. You look out across the dark countryside again, and for a brief moment, you understand why lords built these towers, not just for defense, but for perspective. From up here, the world looks almost understandable, boundaried, manageable. Below, chaos reigns. Up here, order feels possible. You stay for a long while on that battlement, listening to the sigh of the wind against the stone. It's easy to forget the violence these walls once witnessed, to be lulled by the illusion of stillness. But castles were never just homes. They were statements of fear disguised as confidence. Tomorrow, you'll descend again, to the kitchens, the stables, the chapels, and the dungeons. The parts of the castle that weren't built for glory, but for survival. The human heart of the fortress beats down there, in the firelight and the shadows, where servants worked and whispers lived. For now, though, you let the night wrap around you, and the centuries blur into one long, unbroken breath of stone and silence. You descend from the tower slowly, one hand grazing the cold inner wall of the spiral stair. The echo of your boots fades behind you, swallowed by the thickness of stone. Downward, down toward the heart of the castle's next marvel. The moats and the water defenses, the damp and clever world where engineering meets paranoia. Outside, the air grows wetter, the stone walls weeping from centuries of trapped rain. You follow a narrow corridor until it opens into a low archway that leads out to the moat's edge. There it is, stretching in a lazy half circle around the fortress, dark and shimmering under a sliver of moon. The water looks calm now, but you know better. A medieval moat was not a romantic ribbon around a fairy tale castle. It was a fetid soup of defense, often as deadly as any sword. You kneel by the edge. The smell hits you first, a mix of silt, algae, and something ancient. Back then, moats were rarely pristine lakes. They were stagnant trenches filled with whatever the garrison could spare refuse. Dead animals, even sewage. Think of it less as a moat and more as a microbial minefield. It was a deterrent in every sense. Nobody wanted to swim across that. Of course, not every moat was water-filled. In drier regions or on steep hills, dry moats, known as ditches or foss, served the same purpose. Deep, sheer-sided, and lined with stone, they made scaling the walls nearly impossible. Attackers who reached the bottom would find themselves trapped in a deadly bowl, open to arrows, stones, and boiling oil from above. You can almost hear it now, the shouts echoing off the stone, the thud of rocks landing, the sound of panic as men slipped and clawed for purchase. But the true genius of medieval water defenses wasn't just in the moat itself. It was in how it connected to everything else. The moat was alive. It was part of a hydraulic system that included dams, sluices, and secret drains, all designed to control the flow of water. You follow the faint gurgle to a stone conduit, narrow, damp, slick with moss. That's a sluice gate. It could be opened or closed to flood or drain the moat, or even to drown tunnels dug by besiegers. You picture the scene: engineers. Yes, engineers, working with wooden levers and iron chains, adjusting the flow of water like stagehands during a play. If an enemy tried to mine under the walls, defenders could flood their tunnels in an instant, turning the earth into a collapsing, airless pit. Historians still argue whether some of these water traps were planned from the start or improvised later, but the effect was the same: water became a weapon. And then there was the bridge, the narrow lifeline over that murky moat. You walk toward it now. By torchlight, you see its massive wooden beams and iron chains. This was the drawbridge, the iconic movable jaw of the castle. When raised, it sealed the gatehouse like a mouth clamped shut. When lowered, it formed a trembling path of trust over the water. You imagine the clanking of chains, the rhythmic creak of wood as the drawbridge lifted. The mechanism itself was usually simple but brilliant. A pair of counterweighted beams pivoted on large pins, often aided by tread wheels or winches manned by sweating guards. Lowering it too fast could splinter the planks. Raising it too slow could cost lives. The timing had to be perfect. There's a small chamber next to the gatehouse, and you can see the slots where the bridge chains ran through. The grooves are still worn smooth from centuries of motion. Inside, the air is thick with oil and rust, the smell of ancient machinery. You can imagine the guards here, waiting for a signal from above, gripping the handles, shouting as they cranked the bridge up and down. Not far from the drawbridge is another device, less famous, but equally vital: the postern gate. It's a small, hidden door leading to the outer bank, often disguised by reeds or walls. The postern was used for secret escapes or surprise sallies, the quiet exhale of a besieged castle. Some were built directly over the water, accessible only by boat. Others were half submerged, forcing anyone who used them to wade silently through mud and reeds in the dark. You run your hand along the stone frame of one such door. The stones here are worn smooth, not from feet, but from hands. So many people must have brushed against this wall, slipping out under cover of fog, carrying messages or hope. There's something tender about that thought. The human trace in a fortress designed for fear. A sudden splash draws your gaze to the water again. Ripples widen, catching the faint light. You think of the fish that lived in moats. Yes, some castles kept them intentionally. Carp, eels, even pike. It was both a food source and an early form of aquaculture. Some lords prided themselves on their moat fisheries, boasting about the size of their carp at feasts. Picture it? Ah yes, my moat produces a fine catch this season. It's one of those details that makes history feel absurdly human. And yet, the moat wasn't purely defensive. It was symbolic. Water meant separation. It divided the sacred from the profane, the lord from the peasant, the safe from the unsafe. To cross it was to enter a different world, one ruled by law, privilege, and often cruelty. Standing at the bridge, you can feel that psychological weight. The moat isn't just a ditch, it's a boundary of power. You remember earlier how we talked about towers offering perspective. The moat offers humility, or maybe irony. Because for all their height and grandeur, castles needed the lowest thing, water, to protect them. In that way, they were grounded by their own fear. You follow the edge of the moat further, where it bends toward a stream. Many castles were built near rivers not by accident, but by design. Water could be diverted to fill the moat, to turn mills, to supply kitchens and baths. Engineers used weirs and leats to direct flow precisely. One misjudged gradient, and the whole system failed. You think of how many anonymous builders must have stood here centuries ago, measuring slope by eye, trusting their instinct. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps not, of a castle in Wales where the builder miscalculated the water flow. The moat overflowed during its first winter, flooded the courtyard, and froze. The Lord reportedly used it for skating that year, and had the engineer hanged come spring. Historians still argue whether that tale's true. But it fits the mood of the age perfection was demanded, and failure punished with theatrical flair. Your eyes wander back to the water. The moon now rides high, its reflection trembling in the moat's surface. A frog croaks somewhere near the reeds. The castle looms above you, its reflection wavering beside it. A double world of stone and shadow. You can almost see why poets romanticized this view centuries later. By daylight, castles are power. By moonlight, they're dreams. The sound of dripping echoes under the arch. Somewhere, a sluice gate leaks, its slow rhythm marking time. The water keeps moving, always shifting, always alive. Even when the castle fell, the moat remained, filling with silt, becoming a pond, then a meadow. Some still hold their shape, green depressions, where once the lords kept fear afloat. You take one last look at the surface, feeling the cool breath of water on your skin. You can almost imagine dipping a hand in, though, honestly, you probably wouldn't survive that medieval bacteria cocktail. Still, there's something hypnotic about the reflection. The castle above, the stars scattered across ripples, the faint shimmer of torchlight trembling on the current. You realize this is the quietest part of the fortress, not because it's empty, but because it listens. The water hears everything: footsteps on the bridge, whispers from the gatehouse, the thud of hooves in the courtyard. It's a witness to centuries of fear, triumph, and decay, and it remembers in silence. And as you turn to leave, the faintest mist begins to rise from the surface, curling around the base of the walls like a ghost coming home. You step away from the moat, the mist curling behind you like steam from an exhaled dream. Ahead looms the Barbican, that strange, hybrid creature of architecture, part corridor, part death trap, and all performance. You pass beneath its shadow now, and the air grows thick with purpose. This is no simple outer wall. The Barbican is the castle's handshake, and its snarl, greeting visitors with ceremony or crushing intruders with calculation. It begins deceptively enough, an arched gateway flanked by towers, often standing apart from the main walls, connected by a narrow, walled path known as the Neck. To a friendly guest, it might have seemed like a grand entrance. To an enemy, it was a stone gauntlet. You walk the length of it now, the torchlight flickering across its narrow passage, your boots echoing in the hollow corridor. Above you are murder holes, those charming little openings from which defenders could pour down unpleasant surprises. Rocks, boiling water, even molten sand. And yes, sand. Historians still argue whether boiling oil was really used. It was too expensive. But sand heated in an iron cauldron could sear through armor like butter. You tilt your head up at the ceiling and can almost feel the ghosts of falling grit. The Barbican was a study in choreography. Attackers forced to enter single file would find themselves trapped between walls so close you could touch both sides with outstretched arms. Arrows would rain from slits, spears could jab through gaps. And then, if the drawbridge was lowered, a second gate awaited them inside, followed by yet another portcullis. It was a deadly accordion of stone and steel, compressing chaos into control. You pause by a groove in the wall where the portcullis once slid down. The slot is deep, worn smooth by centuries of motion. Imagine the moment, a thunderous slam of oak and iron teeth biting into stone, cutting off the light, trapping men inside the neck like insects in a bottle. The portcullis wasn't just a barrier, it was theatre. The sound alone could freeze a heart. In some great fortresses, like Beaumaris or Carcassonne, the Barbican became almost an architectural prelude, a statement piece before the main act. Lords spent fortunes making their outer defences beautiful. Sculpted coats of arms, fluted towers, carved beasts. Power had to look good. even when it was about to kill you. There's something darkly poetic in that. A kind of medieval marketing strategy. Welcome to my fortress. You'll die in style. You step further inside and find yourself standing in a small courtyard between the outer barbican and the main gatehouse. The walls here lean inward ever so slightly, guiding the eye. And the enemy, exactly where the defenders wanted them. A narrow bridge runs overhead, connecting two towers like a rib of stone. From up there, guards could shoot directly downward, a vantage point so perfect it feels unfair. You can almost hear the shouts, the confusion of a siege. Battering rams thudding against the gate, the deep boom reverberating through the passage. Smoke, sweat, curses, and above it all, calm defenders with crossbows, leaning from the walls. A castle's barbican wasn't just a place to fight. It was a psychological weapon. To step inside it was to feel small, watched, and doomed. Even peaceful visitors weren't immune to its intimidation. Ambassadors, pilgrims, nobles, all passed through these same narrow corridors. Their first impression of the Lord within was control. Every sound was amplified, every movement visible from above. The barbican made sure you felt the weight of permission. You stop at a recessed alcove, a guard station. It's barely the size of a closet, but you can see where a bench once stood, worn smooth by armor and waiting. Guards here were the first to see guests, the last to see enemies. Their duty was long and cold, but their vantage point was absolute. From a narrow slit, you can see the entire approach road winding toward the outer gate, the faint glimmer of moonlight on distant helmets. Behind you, the path leads deeper into the main gatehouse. You follow it, ducking under another arch. The air cools again, heavy with the smell of damp stone. Torches gutter in iron brackets. You can hear the faint drip of water somewhere nearby. A slow rhythm, like the heartbeat of the castle itself. The gatehouse is the castle's brain, where every command and defense converged. Within these walls were gears, chains, winches, the mechanical core that raised portcullises and bridges. You reach one of those rooms now, and you can almost feel the ghost of motion. Wooden beams creak under imagined strain. Somewhere in another century, a soldier shouts, "Raise it!" The portcullis climbs inch by inch, its iron lattice glinting in torchlight. Each chain groans under tension, links grinding against pulleys. The smell of iron dust fills the air. To raise a gate in wartime was an act of enormous trust. One mistake, and the enemy floods in like water through a broken dam. You run a hand along the winch handle, imagining the calluses of the men who worked it. In peace, this would have been their routine, opening the gate each morning, lowering it each night. It was part ritual, part reassurance, the daily breathing of the castle. Outside, a gust of night air drifts in through the murder holes. It carries the faint scent of wood smoke and horses from the outer bailey. You stand there for a moment, listening to the soft hum of a living fortress. The barbican wasn't always permanent. Some early castles built temporary wooden ones during sieges, quick defenses to guard breaches or entrances. Over time, though, the structure became integral, symbolic of the castle's evolution from mere fortress to living city. By the late Middle Ages, some barbicans were large enough to house guards, stores, even chapels. They became miniature fortresses of their own, defenses nested within defenses like Russian dolls of paranoia. A quirky tidbit here: in some regions, barbicans were rented out in peacetime. Yes, really. Merchants or craftsmen might live in the outer gatehouse, paying rent to the lord for the privilege. Imagine setting up your workshop inside what used to be a killing corridor, an early version of repurposed industrial chic. But not all barbicans were purely defensive or decorative. Some were downright cunning. One chronicler describes a fortress whose outer passage was designed with a false exit, a dead-end chamber disguised as a gate. Attackers would rush in, thinking they'd broken through, only to find themselves trapped in a stone box, as archers rained death from hidden slits. Historians still argue whether that specific trap was ever actually built, or just a bragging rumor. Either way, it captures the spirit of medieval defense. Architecture as chess, with blood as currency. You reach the final gate now, the inner mouth of the castle proper. Beyond it lies the courtyard, quiet and sleeping. You turn for a moment to look back through the long throat of the barbican, its torches flickering like distant stars. From this angle, it seems almost gentle, its angles softened by shadow. You realize, suddenly, that the barbican isn't just about keeping people out. It's about deciding who gets to come in. It's a ritual threshold, a line drawn between chaos and order. Every visitor, friend or foe, had to pass through this slow compression of space, to be measured and judged by its geometry. You take one last step into the courtyard, the cool night wrapping around you. Behind you, the drawbridge chains groan softly, the great gate lowers, and the barbican settles once more into silence. If the moat was the castle's moat of fear, then the barbican is its smile, a polite, lethal grin carved in stone. The courtyard is still. Moonlight falls over the cobblestones like a soft blanket, silvery and forgiving. The air smells faintly of hay smoke, and bread that's long gone cold. You stand there for a moment listening. Somewhere deep inside the walls, a dog barks once, sleepily, without purpose, and then quiet returns. You've spent so long among the battlements and moats and traps that it's easy to forget what all this defense was really for. Life. Ordinary, human life. The people who cooked and mended and swept, who laughed and argued, who loved and died within these walls. Castles weren't just fortresses. They were homes. Complicated, drafty, hierarchical homes. And now, as you step toward the Great Hall, you finally get to see what that life might have felt like. Your boots scuff on the stones as you walk beneath an arched colonnade. The torches burn low, and your shadow bends with the curve of the wall. You pass by narrow doors, storage chambers, maybe servant quarters, and through an open archway that leads into the Great Hall, the castle's beating heart. The air inside is thick with the ghost of heat. Once a great fire burned here day and night, throwing orange light across the rafters and tapestries. You can still see the massive hearth, a stone cavern big enough to roast an ox whole. Above it, a carved lintel bears faint traces of heraldic beasts, the paint long since faded. You walk slowly down the center of the hall. The floor is worn smooth by centuries of feet and feasts. You can almost hear the noise, the laughter of knights, the clatter of trenchers, the hiss of spit, roasted meat, the deep hum of a lute. The sound of life echoing off stone. The Great Hall was everything at once's dining room, courtroom, dormitory theatre. By day, it was the Lord's office. By night, his household's bedroom. Servants would roll out straw pallets along the edges, sharing space with hounds, and sometimes chickens. Privacy was a luxury for the few. Your eyes lift to the high table at the far end, raised on a dais. This is where the Lord and Lady sat, backs to the wall, facing the room. Everyone else, knights, priests, squires, sat lower, according to their rank. The whole arrangement was one big diagram of power, rendered in furniture. You can almost imagine it now, the Lord in fur, trimmed robes, the lady beside him, her hands resting on the carved armrest, both of them illuminated by candlelight. Behind them, the banner of their family swaying gently in the smoky air. Below, a jester performs, or a bard sings. Or maybe there's a heated debate about crop yields. One mainstream historical fact: you can't skip the Great Hall was the center of justice. Local disputes, stolen pigs, broken promises, quarrels over land, were judged right here, in front of everyone. Punishments could be swift and very public. The same table where dinner was served might hold a prisoner's hand for branding the next morning. Still, amid the roughness, there was ritual. The medieval household had a rhythm: bells for waking, bells for prayer, bells for meals. Even the act of dining followed ceremony: hand washing, blessing, serving in strict order. You weren't just eating, you were participating in a performance of hierarchy. You moved toward the corner of the hall, where a narrow stair leads upward. The steps creak faintly under your feet as you climb to the sola, the Lord's private chamber. Compared to the hall below, it feels intimate, almost delicate. The walls are plastered smooth and faintly tinted with ochre. A small fireplace glows faintly, and above it, a tapestry flutters with the draught. There's a bed here, canopied and heavy with fabric, big enough for 2 or 3 people. In medieval terms, this was comfort bordering on luxury. The mattress would have been stuffed with feathers or wool, the sheets of linen. Candles flicker on a wooden chest beside it, their wax running in slow rivers. You notice a small window to one side. A glass pane, impossibly rare. Most people in this age lived their entire lives behind wooden shutters or oiled cloth. Here, though, sunlight could actually enter unfiltered. The lord and lady would sit by this window in the mornings, sipping warm ale and discussing matters of the estate: tithers, tenants, harvests. And yes, warm ale, because medieval people didn't trust plain water. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Even children drank small beer, a weekly brewed ale that killed bacteria better than the local stream ever could. From the sola, you step through a side door into the chapel. It's small, almost hidden, and it smells faintly of stone dust and candle smoke. The air feels cooler here, the sound of your breath louder. Castles often had private chapels like this, where the household prayed daily. The Lord's pew was always nearest the altar, because even before God, rank mattered. A stained glass window filters the moonlight into fragments of blue and red. You look up and see faint traces of saints' faces, their eyes hollowed by time. Somewhere above, a bell might have rung the hour for compline, the last prayer of the night. You can almost feel the stillness of it, the quiet after a day's noise. From prayer to privy is only a short walk, and yes, that's where you're headed next. Medieval comfort, after all, included one marvel we rarely talk about: the garderobe. You find one down a side corridor, tucked into the wall like an architectural afterthought. It's basically a stone closet with a wooden seat, and a vertical shaft leading outside the walls, waste dropped into the moat or into a cesspit below. You lean over carefully, not too close, and peer down. The shaft seems endless, the air cold and strangely clean. Some garderobes even had small windows for ventilation. Others were shared, with wooden partitions between seats. It's humbling to think of the contrast, the great hall's grandeur and the garderobe's crude practicality, all within a few meters. Historians still argue whether the word garderobe meant wardrobe, because clothes were hung there to keep lice away from the ammonia fumes. It's one of those details that makes you laugh and cringe at once. Either way, medieval hygiene was inventive. You leave that particular room behind quickly and follow the corridor toward the kitchens. The air grows warmer again, filled with the faint smell of ash and herbs. The kitchen complex lies near the base of the castle, close to the well and storerooms. Here, life pulsed constantly. Fires roared in huge hearths, spits turned slowly by boys or by mechanical dogs. Yes, there were contraptions called turnspit dogs, little cannons trained to run in tread wheels that rotated roasting spits. Historians still debate whether that's more clever or cruel. Copper pots hung from hooks, bread baked in great ovens, barrels of salted meat lined the walls. You can almost hear the bustle: cooks shouting, knives chopping, scullions scrubbing, the clang of ladles against cauldrons. The kitchen was a world apart, ruled by its own hierarchy. The master cook was a figure of authority, managing both food and people like a general managing troops. On feast days, the energy must have been electric. Imagine hauling whole deer carcasses into the room, gutting fish, plucking geese, baking pies filled with live birds, real thing, meant to flutter out when the crust was cut. Every meal was part sustenance, part spectacle, and yet, even here, there were rules of conservation. Nothing went to waste. Bones became broth, stale bread became pudding, fat was rendered into candles or soap. Medieval kitchens were loud, smoky laboratories of necessity and invention. You leave the warmth of the kitchen behind and step into the cool storage cellars. Barrels of ale, sacks of grain, wheels of cheese, all neatly stacked in dim rows. You run your hand over one of the barrels. It's slick with condensation. A drop of water falls from the ceiling, echoing softly. Somewhere above, the lord and lady are probably asleep by now, the great hall dark, the guards pacing the walls. But down here, someone is still awake. The night watchman, perhaps, or a servant finishing chores. Castles never truly slept. You pause by a narrow slit window and peer outside. The courtyard lies still, the moon reflected faintly in a puddle by the stables. You can hear the low murmur of horses shifting in their stalls. You think of all the lives that have passed through this place. Hundreds, thousands, each leaving some small mark on the stone. Every creak, every groove, every scratch on a door frame is a story. You realize that for all its grandeur, the castle is, at heart, an accumulation of human gestures. Ordinary people doing ordinary things under extraordinary architecture. A fortress, yes, but also a home. You're still in that quiet cellar when the first faint rumble reaches your ears. At first, it sounds like distant thunder, but then you realize it's not weather. It's the sound of men, machines, and something heavy moving across the earth. Outside the castle, war is waking up. You climb the narrow stairs two at a time, the chill of the stone seeping into your palms as you steady yourself. When you emerge onto the wall walk, the air feels charged, the sky tinted pink with dawn. Down below, across the moat, banners ripple in the wind. Enemy colors. You can't quite make out the emblems, but they move like a living sea. And there it is, the siege. If the castle is a body, then this is its heartbeat under stress. For every grand banquet or lazy afternoon, there were seasons like this, brutal, tense, and methodical. You can smell smoke already. Someone setting up a campfire in the distance. The defenders gather on the walls, adjusting their helmets, checking their arrows. The air smells of oil, sweat, and fear that everyone pretends not to have. A few jokes are traded, black humor, the kind that keeps you breathing when everything else tells you not to. You overhear one knight mutter, "Hope they brought enough ladders to make a bridge." No one laughs too loud. Medieval sieges were as much about patience as violence. Attackers didn't charge right away, they built. Down there, in the open field, you watch them raise tents, dig trenches, and start assembling wooden towers. Catapults appear piece by piece, like great skeletal beasts. You'd almost admire the craftsmanship if you weren't on the receiving end. One mainstream historical fact: sieges could last months, sometimes years. The longest recorded medieval siege was the Siege of Candia, which dragged on for 21 years in the 1600s. By that point, even boredom probably needed armor. Most castle sieges, though, ended faster. By starvation, surrender, or the lucky shot of a well-aimed stone. You lean against the parapet, watching the rhythm of preparation below. Inside the walls, others are busy too. Blacksmiths hammering arrowheads, women filling water buckets, children gathering kindling. The whole castle becomes a machine of survival. Someone hands you a crossbow. It's heavier than you expected. The cord creaks as you draw it back, the bolt clicking into place with a sound that feels far too final. The morning passes in slow bursts. You hear the first thud of stones hitting walls, the deep thrum of trebuchets releasing. A boulder arcs through the sky, turning lazily before it slams into the curtain wall below your feet. Dust flies. The ground shudders. The defenders cheer when it holds. You feel the vibration in your bones. Trebuchets were terrifyingly elegant. They used counterweights, sometimes several tons of stone, or even lead, to fling projectiles hundreds of meters. Some historians argue whether they were more psychological than effective, because half their power was spectacle. When that arm swung through the air, it wasn't just launching stone, it was declaring intent. A messenger rushes along the wall, shouting orders. You duck as another missile whistles overhead. It lands in the courtyard, crushing a wagon into splinters. For a heartbeat, you can't breathe. The scale of it all, the sound, the dust, the sudden silence after impact, feels unreal. Then the rhythm begins again. Down below, men in armor push forward wooden shelters called mantlets, crawling slowly toward the gate. Arrows rain from above. You fire your crossbow once, twice. Each bolt vanishes into the mass of movement. You tell yourself they hit something, but you don't really want to know. By noon, the attackers have brought up one of their siege towers, a monstrous contraption of timber and hide. It lurches forward on creaking wheels, taller than the walls themselves. You can smell pitch burning. Someone's trying to set it alight with flaming arrows. For a moment, it works. Smoke billows. A few attackers scatter, but the tower keeps coming, blackened but unstoppable. Inside the castle, people are preparing for the worst. The kitchens are sealed, supplies rationed. You pass a mother ladling thin stew into bowls for frightened children. A guard carries a bucket of water past, muttering something about 3 days of rainwater left. Siege life was a long test of nerves. Food ran out, disease spread, morale broke before walls did. Sometimes the defenders negotiated. You can have the castle, but let us live. Other times, pride held longer than reason. You head back to the wall in time to see the attacker's tower reach the moat. The drawbridge on its front slams down like a tongue. Men rush forward, shields raised, shouting. You can feel every vibration through the stone beneath you. Defenders dump boiling water, hurl rocks, anything to break the wave. Contrary to legend, they didn't usually use boiling oil. Too expensive, too precious. Someone above you drops a barrel of sand, the grains cascading down like molten fire. The air fills with smoke and shouts. And still, the tower keeps pressing closer. Historians still argue whether these large siege engines were truly worth the effort. Some point out that the attackers often lost more men building and moving them than they gained from breaching the wall. Others say it wasn't about efficiency at all. It was about intimidation. You weren't just fighting, you were staging a show of dominance. Night falls before either side gives in. The attackers withdraw to their campfires. The castle holds, and the world settles into uneasy quiet. You sit on the parapet, legs dangling, the sky above thick with smoke and stars. Someone passes you a chunk of hard bread and a small flask of ale. You chew slowly, staring at the enemy camp's orange glow. You realize how strange it is that all this destruction starts with design. Every wall, every tower, every loophole in this castle was made not to invite beauty, but to buy time. The genius of it all lies not in comfort, but in survival. As the night deepens, you hear faint music drifting from the attacker's camp. Someone's playing a pipe, softly. It's haunting, almost tender. You wonder if they, too, are staring at your walls, thinking about home. There's a moment then, a quiet, human one, when you remember that war was never the only purpose of castles. It was just the one history couldn't stop repeating. The next morning brings a new tactic. The attackers have rolled forward something squat, an ugly battering ram. It's covered in wet hides to resist fire, and the beam swings rhythmically against the gate. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact feels like it hits your chest. Inside, men brace the doors with timbers. Others pour water on the hinges to keep them from splitting. You can see sweat glistening on their foreheads, their mouths moving in silent prayer. The ram keeps pounding. The sound becomes a kind of heartbeat, slow, relentless, impossible to ignore. And then, suddenly, silence. The attackers have stopped. The air holds still for a breath, 2, 3. You glance over the wall. They're retreating. You can hardly believe it. Word spreads fast. A relief army is on the way. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Allied banners have been spotted. Trumpets blare from the towers, cautious at first, then triumphant. You feel your shoulders drop for the first time in days. A breeze stirs through the courtyard. You close your eyes and let it cool your face. The siege is over. This one, at least. You think about what the castle has endured: bombardment, hunger, fear. Yet it stands. The stone is chipped but unbroken, the spirit inside equally so. Some historians say the true genius of medieval fortification wasn't in its walls at all, but in its psychology. It made the people inside believe in endurance. The architecture whispered, you can outlast them. And somehow, they usually did. The morning after the siege, the castle feels lighter, emptier somehow, but not broken. You walk through its courtyard and find that even the air tastes different, crisp, metallic, threaded with relief. The banners flutter gently on the towers, catching sunlight that hasn't touched these stones in days. The fires are out. The crows are back. You wander toward the high wall that faces the valley, where the view stretches for miles. Below, a river glints like a strip of glass, winding through fields that seem impossibly peaceful given the chaos of yesterday. It's here that you finally notice something you hadn't before. Not the thickness of the walls, but their placement. Castles, after all, were never built just anywhere. They were composed like art. From this vantage, you see how the castle sits on its hill like a crown, commanding every line of sight. The builders weren't just defending, they were declaring. The whole structure was a statement. We are here. We have power. You can see it from 20 miles away. It's funny. After all the fire and siege, the genius of medieval design now feels quieter, subtler. You realize that power wasn't only about surviving, it was about being seen surviving. You rest your hands on the cold stone of the battlement and look out. The symmetry, the height, the calculated intimidation. It's all part of the message. These castles weren't hidden fortresses, they were meant to be watched. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering: during the Norman expansion into England, after 1066, visibility was key. William the Conqueror ordered castles placed on high ground, near rivers and roads, so that both friend and foe could see them. They were monuments of control. Yes, but also billboards of dominance. Below you, peasants move along the road like tiny ants, their carts piled with goods. They look up occasionally, perhaps offering a small bow to the unseen lord above. You realize the castle isn't just protecting them, it's governing them. From the fields, the castle's silhouette dominates the horizon. Its towers are vertical exclamation points in a landscape of low cottages. Even on foggy days, the shape looms faintly, reminding everyone of its owner's reach. You smile a little. Medieval PR was nothing if not dramatic. You descend from the wall walk, following a corridor lined with arrow loops that now serve only to frame the blue morning light. The passage opens into the courtyard again, where a fountain trickles faintly, a small luxury rebuilt from rainwater and hope. There, near the gate, you find something curious. 2 carved lions flanking the arch. Their mouths are open, teeth bared in stylized snarl. The stone is weathered smooth, but the symbolism remains clear. Even decoration here is weaponized. You trace the shape of one paw with your fingers. It's been rubbed shiny by countless hands. Perhaps for luck, or respect, or simple superstition. Medieval people loved symbols. Everything meant something, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. the lion for courage, the dragon for guardianship, the fleur de lis for divine favor. Castles weren't just functional, they were layered with messages. The carvings on gates, the banners above the towers, even the color of paint on the great hall walls. Yes, many were painted bright ochre, vermilion, or blue. All told stories about who lived here and what they believed about themselves. You step into the courtyard center, where the sunlight catches on the stained glass windows of the chapel. From this angle, you notice how the whole castle seems oriented. Not randomly, but almost theatrically. The entrance faces the rising sun, the chapel toward Jerusalem, the great hall angled so that light falls perfectly on the high table at noon. Historians still argue whether this alignment was intentional piety or practical design, but you can't deny the effect. The space feels charged, as if geometry itself had been bent toward reverence. You walk toward the edge of the courtyard, where a group of stonemasons are repairing cracks left from the siege. Their tools ring against the wall, a rhythmic clinking that almost sounds musical. One of them, a broad man with dust on his beard, glances at you and shrugs. "Still stands," he says, with quiet pride. And indeed, it does. You follow him for a while, watching how he fits a new block into an old fracture. It's mesmerizing, the precision, the patience, the respect for angles. Every line of the wall seems deliberate, intentional, balanced. The masons didn't just build walls, they composed them. You look closer and notice the subtle tapering of the towers. They're not perfectly cylindrical. They narrow slightly as they rise, creating the illusion of height. That's right. Medieval architects were optical illusionists. They used perspective centuries before the Renaissance claimed it. You laugh softly to yourself. Somewhere, a modern architect just sighed in envy. As you walk along the outer ward, you begin to notice other tricks. The main gatehouse isn't centered. It's offset slightly, forcing attackers to turn left as they enter. Why? Because most people were right-handed, and turning left exposed their sword arm to defenders. A detail invisible to the untrained eye, but deadly in practice. This is the genius of castle designs. Every aesthetic choice doubles as strategy. Beauty and brutality share the same blueprint. You stop at a narrow archway leading to the postern gate. A small, hidden door used for secret exits or surprise attacks. It's set low into the wall, practically invisible from the outside. From within, it frames a perfect view of the meadow below. You realize it also serves as an escape and a viewfinder, a tiny window of safety and power. Light falls in stripes through the arrow slits above, dust moats swirling like lazy snow. The quiet feels reverent, as if the castle itself is exhaling after the storm. For a moment, you imagine what a visiting noble might have felt approaching these gates for the first time. The long uphill ride, the glint of banners, the imposing geometry. It would have been overwhelming, deliberate theater. You weren't just arriving, you were being welcomed by architecture. Inside, every step reaffirmed your place in the social hierarchy. Servants bowed, guards saluted, bells chimed. Even the acoustics of the hall amplified authority, the Lord's voice echoing louder than anyone else's. You could say castles were designed to make obedience echo. One quirky tidbit that still makes historians grin: some castles had talking walls. Small holes near the high table allowed servants in the kitchens to overhear and anticipate commands, or even eavesdrop on gossip. Essentially, medieval intercoms. You wander back to the ramparts and sit down. The valley stretches out beneath you again. Fields, smoke, quiet villages. It's peaceful now, but you can almost sense the invisible threads connecting every piece of this landscape to the stone beneath you. Castles weren't isolated fortresses. They were hubs, administrative, economic, spiritual. The Lord's word from this tower rippled outward, like a command through water taxes collected, disputes settled, armies raised. all of it began in this seat of stone. As you sit there, wind brushing your hair, you notice how the design doesn't just protect, it inspires. These walls weren't made only to keep enemies out. They were built to remind the people inside that they belonged to something greater, heavier, older. You think of the masons, the lords, the peasants, even the enemies who stared up at these same towers centuries ago. Each of them, in their own way, was responding to a message written in architecture. And the message is still clear today: power isn't only held, it's seen. The sun slides lower over the horizon, turning the river into molten gold. You rest your back against the wall, watching the light trace every carved line, every crack in the stone. For all its age, the castle still commands the land beneath it, its geometry whispering of order, pride, and the peculiar human need to build things that outlast us. You smile faintly, thinking how every curve and corner here once had a purpose, and now has poetry. The light is fading again. That soft medieval twilight when shadows lengthen, and everything turns the color of honeyed parchment. You trace your fingers along the stone wall as you wander down one of the side corridors you haven't explored before. The air feels cooler here, older somehow, carrying a faint scent of earth and damp mortar. There's a draft that doesn't quite make sense. It seems to come from the wall itself. That's when you notice it, a hairline seam in the stonework, half hidden behind an old tapestry. You pull it aside, and the torchlight wavers over what looks like the outline of a door. Narrow, tall, and nearly invisible. You smile, because of course, every good castle hides its secrets. The latch gives with a soft scrape, and a gust of stale air breathes out. You duck inside, the space barely wide enough for your shoulders, and suddenly you're standing in darkness that feels thick, physical, almost alive. You can hear water dripping somewhere below, echoing faintly. This is one of the castle's sally ports, a hidden tunnel meant for quick escapes or surprise counter-attacks. The floor slopes downward, the stones slick beneath your boots. As you move, you run your hand along the wall. It's damp and cold, and occasionally your fingers catch on carved initials or strange chalk marks left by someone long gone. Historians still argue whether these passages were mainly practical or symbolic, used often, or merely meant to give the illusion of secret power. Some claim they doubled as smugglers' routes, others as burial exits for plague victims when the main gates were sealed. The truth is, most castles probably had at least one, and almost every legend added 5 more. Your torch flickers as you turn a corner, and the tunnel widens. You find a low door of reinforced oak, its hinges crusted with rust. You push gently, it creaks open into a small, circular chamber that smells of mildew and old iron. On the far wall, you see a narrow slit letting in faint moonlight. A secret watch post, perfect for observing the moat unseen. You peer through the slit. The view is perfect. An attacker could walk right beneath you without ever realizing he was being watched. The slit's angle is clever too, narrowing to a deadly funnel that amplifies any sound from outside. You whisper softly, and the echo feels like it travels for miles. You can imagine a guard posted here on a winter night, alone, wrapped in a cloak. His only company the slow drip of water and the occasional scurrying rat. Maybe he carved those initials in the tunnel out of boredom. Maybe he fell asleep and dreamed of sunlight. As you climb back up the passage, you notice another tunnel branching off to the side, this one narrower and filled with cobwebs. Against your better judgment, you stoop and follow it. After several steps, it turns abruptly and stops before a rough stone wall. But the air here feels different, less stale, as if something beyond is hollow. You press your palm against it, and it sounds faintly empty. You grin. A blocked-off corridor, perhaps. Or something even stranger. One quirky tidbit that delights castle researchers is that secret passages weren't always for escape or spying. Some were built as sound conduits, tiny channels that allowed voices to carry between rooms. Priests in a private chapel could hear confessions whispered from behind the altar, or servants could receive orders from unseen masters. Essentially, medieval SMR, whisper networks carved into stone. You chuckle softly, half expecting to hear a ghostly voice say, "Like and subscribe," from the other side. The passage finally leads upward, toward the castle's undercroft, a cool vaulted space used for storage, and sometimes, rumor had it, for imprisonment. The air here smells faintly of wax and limestone. You raise your torch, and the ceiling arches overhead like a ribcage. In the far corner, you find a metal ring bolted into the wall. A shiver travels down your spine. Was this used for chaining prisoners, or perhaps just for securing barrels? Hard to say. Medieval architecture loved multi-purpose design. You notice faint scratches near the floor, not letters, just random marks. Or maybe they're tally lines, counting days. You don't linger to find out. Up a short flight of steps, you emerge into a narrow hallway behind the Great Hall's days. The perfect spot for servants to listen unseen, or for someone to slip quietly away mid-feast. You realize now how the entire castle is threaded with hidden arteries. The public grandeur you saw earlier sits atop a private labyrinth, a mainstream historical fact. Many castles had deliberately designed false walls and blind passages, traps for invading soldiers. Some led nowhere, others circled back to dead ends. The French Château Gaillard, for instance, famously used curved staircases that favored right-handed defenders. Attackers would swing against the curve, striking stone instead of flesh. Genius in geometry. You press your palm against one of the cold stones and feel the hum of air behind it. Another hollow pocket, another mystery. The more you look, the more you see this castle is alive with secrets. You make your way to the lower courtyard again, where the moonlight glances off a small iron grate in the ground. You kneel, lift it carefully, and peer down into blackness. The smell of earth rushes up. Below is what remains of the castle well, once the most vital lifeline during sieges, and often the sneakiest hiding place. In some fortresses, the well shaft was expanded into underground rooms. One English castle even hid an escape tunnel behind its well wall, accessible only by removing specific stones in a precise sequence. Historians discovered it centuries later, when a cleaning crew dropped a bucket and heard it bounce for an unnaturally long time. You lower your torch and see faint movement. Just the flicker of air, maybe a bat. Still, your imagination paints the rest. A desperate lord crawling through that tunnel while fire rages above, clutching a pouch of gold, leaving his crown behind. You close the grate and lean back, exiling. There's something strangely comforting about these hidden spaces. They tell a quieter story. The story of fear, cunning, survival. Every secret passage is a confession carved in stone. We were never as safe as we pretended. You wander to the chapel again, remembering its calm light, and glance behind the altar. Sure enough, there's a narrow gap in the wall, masked by a carved panel. Inside, a steep stair descends into darkness. You follow, half amused, half reverent. The stair opens into a small crypt. The air is colder here, and your breath fogs faintly in the torchlight. Stone coffins rest along the walls, lids carved with figures of knights and ladies, hands folded in eternal prayer. Dust has softened their features, but the craftsmanship is still tender. You trace one inscription with your fingers, the Latin barely legible. It feels almost intimate. Like reading someone's diary centuries late. You wonder, did anyone ever hide down here during danger? Or maybe smuggle relics through this crypt passage? Historians still argue whether these subterranean chambers were built for reverence or for convenience. Likely both. In the medieval mind, sacred and strategic often shared the same space. A sudden gust snuffs out your torch. The dark swallows everything. You stand still, heart thudding, And then, softly, a drip from somewhere in the black. You wait, breathing slowly, until your eyes adjust enough to see the faint shimmer of moonlight filtering from a hole above. When you climb back to the surface, the courtyard feels brighter than it should. You take a deep breath of cool air and laugh quietly. The castle may be made of stone, but it's as full of stories as any living thing. Every secret passage you found feels like a heartbeat beneath its skin. You glance back at the wall you entered through earlier. From this side, it looks solid, flawless, innocent. You'd never guess what lies behind it. And that's the genius of it. Medieval design hid its brilliance in plain sight. Up on the ramparts, the wind picks up, carrying the smell of pine and faraway smoke. Somewhere, an owl hoots. You realize that the castle's secrets don't end underground. They ripple outward through every tower and trench, waiting for curious wanderers like you to listen closely. You smile, whisper, "Good night, mystery," and head toward the stair. Morning returns in gold and silver, seeping through the arrow slits and warming the flagstones. You wake slowly, as if the castle itself has been dozing alongside you. The quiet hum of life resumes. The clank of chains on the portcullis, the echo of boots in the bailey, the rhythmic sound of someone sharpening a blade in the armory below. Today, your footsteps take you beyond the living quarters and into the bones of construction. The story of how all this came to exist at all. The stones around you feel eternal, but once, every single one had to be hauled here, chipped, and fitted by hand. Imagine it. Men in rough tunics and leather gloves, heaving pale blocks from an open quarry. The air thick with dust and the smell of lime mortar. Voices shouting over the clang of chisels. Most castle stone was local. Limestone, sandstone, or granite, depending on what the earth offered nearby. Transporting heavy stone over distance was ruinously expensive. So builders learned to use what they had, turning geology into architecture. A castle in Wales would glow pale grey, one in Normandy warm and ochre, one in Scotland dark and speckled like the mountains around it. You follow the imagined road from quarry to wall. The process begins with the mason's mark, a tiny symbol carved into each finished block. Every mason had his own, part signature, part accounting device. You still see them if you look closely. Faint scratches shaped like arrows, stars, or initials. Some castles contain hundreds of different marks, a silent census of the hands that built them. Above ground, cranes of wood and rope stood like giant spiders, powered by men walking inside treadwheels. Enormous wooden hamster wheels. They hoisted tons of stone skyward. The men called it the ladder to heaven, half in jest, half in prayer. You pass through a narrow doorway into what must once have been a mason's yard. The ground is littered with worn stones, tool marks still visible, shallow grooves, compass circles, faint lines where a chisel slipped. You can almost hear the conversations that would have filled this space. Master builders shouting instructions in French or Latin. Apprentices copying patterns on wooden boards, stone cutters singing low songs to keep time with their hammers. 1,000 small sounds building something that was meant to last forever. Castles were rarely built by the people who lived in them. They were the labor of hundreds quarrymen, masons, blacksmiths, carpenters, lime burners, water carriers, cooks, and cart drivers. Most were peasants working under corvée. Unpaid labor owed to the lord as part of their feudal duty. Some were specialists who traveled from site to site. Their knowledge passed down like family treasure. You stop at a deep groove in the wall, where a beam once sat. Scaffolding was built entirely from timber, lashed together with rope, braced at impossible angles. Builders climbed dozens of feet high with no safety lines, carrying hammers heavier than your head. They learned to balance instinctively, to read the wind, to feel when a plank was about to split. The castle's rhythm was set by lime. the alchemical heart of medieval construction. Lime mortar was made by burning limestone, slaking it with water, and mixing it with sand. The result hardened slowly, breathing moisture in and out like living skin. You can still smell it faintly in the walls. A tang of dust, earth, and chemistry. One bucket of wet lime was worth a mason's life if spilled the wrong way. It could eat through flesh and cloth alike. Yet, handled correctly, it became the castle's glue. Patient, flexible, forgiving. Some castles took 10 years to build. Others took lifetimes. The great fortress of Dover, they say, was improved continuously for more than a century. In that sense, castles were never truly finished. They evolved with war, with wealth, with ambition. You pause by a half-broken stone trove where water once soaked timber beams. Oak, the preferred wood, was prized for its strength. The beams were seasoned carefully, sometimes in rivers, sometimes underground, to make them less likely to warp. Above your head, you see faint ghost lines on the stone, outlines of vanished wooden galleries. The castle once breathed with scaffolds and ramps, and even now, the marks remain like scars. At the edge of the yard, you find a small doorway leading into the blacksmith's forge. It's dark and warm inside. The smell of soot and iron still lingers centuries later. You imagine sparks dancing, bellows groaning, the rhythm of hammer on anvil ringing through the valley. Here, nails, hinges, locks, and chains were made. The invisible skeleton of every castle. Each hinge might take a full day to craft, each lock an entire week. You touch a rusted hinge left behind, thick as your hand. Its surface is pitted, but strong. A whisper of endurance. Historians once believed medieval castles were crude, improvised things. But the truth is, they were feats of complex coordination. Geometry, chemistry, physics, and logistics all met under one roof. Orchestrated without blueprints, without machines, guided only by experience and instinct. You imagine the master mason standing in the courtyard, hands on hips, scanning the rising walls. His plans drawn with chalk on a slate board, his memory holding measurements in rhythm rather than numbers. 3 paces, half a span, the width of a man's shoulder. You realize that even the smallest detail, a window's arch, a stair's curve, carries human rhythm. The castle's design was scaled not by rulers but by bodies. Every arch mirrors an arm's reach. Every stair's height matches a stride. Every door's width fits the span of a man carrying a shield. You walk slowly through the courtyard, feeling how the proportions move with you. Not too narrow, not too tall, just right for walking, climbing, living. The whole structure breathes with human measure. A gust of wind stirs the dust, and for a moment you can almost see the ghost of the construction site again. Half-finished towers, cranes creaking, horses snorting, fires burning in lime kilns down the hill. And at night, the workers would sleep right here, on straw under temporary roofs. They'd look up at the unfinished walls, glowing faintly under the moon, and dream of the day when the towers would finally touch the sky. Centuries later, the dream still stands. You reach out and lay your palm flat on the stone. It's cool, solid, humming softly. A vibration you can almost feel under your skin. The memory of thousands of hands, preserved in every block. For a long while, you just stand there, listening. The castle isn't speaking, not exactly. It's remembering. And you're listening in on that memory. You're still tracing that cool, unyielding wall when the distant rumble of thunder rolls over the horizon. Except, this isn't the kind of thunder that comes with rain. This is the new sound of war. The low boom of artillery. The echo of a changing age. The castle, for all its cunning defenses and patient strength, was never meant to withstand explosions. You feel the air shift around you. A moment of stillness before the firestorm of invention that would change architecture forever. Gunpowder had arrived. It didn't come all at once, of course. It crept into Europe in the 13th century, probably through trade routes from China. At first, it was an exotic curiosity. Monks used it for fireworks at feasts. Alchemists mixed it hoping to make gold, and kings, well, kings quickly saw its more exciting potential. By the 14th century, the first crude cannons were roaring across battlefields. They were unpredictable, smoky, and prone to bursting in the faces of those who fired them. But when they worked, they could shatter stone. You picture yourself standing atop one of these ancient towers as a strange new siege begins below. Instead of ladders and catapults, the enemy rolls forward black iron tubes mounted on wooden carts. They light fuses. They wait. Then, boom. The shock runs through your bones. A single shot knocks a corner clean off the wall. Dust fills the air like ash. The age of the trebuchet was ending. The age of the cannon had begun. Castles, which had dominated warfare and landscape alike for centuries, were suddenly vulnerable. Historians still argue whether this shift was inevitable, whether gunpowder truly killed the castle, or if political and social change did the real damage. But you can see why people panicked. The walls that once repelled everything could now crumble in a single afternoon. So, naturally, humans did what they always do when progress punches them in the jaws. They adapted. You step down into the courtyard, and your eyes follow the lines of the walls. Thick, vertical, proud. Beautiful, but now wrong. The new age demanded a new shape. Instead of high towers and thin parapets, builders started favoring squat, sloping bastions that could deflect cannonballs. This was the birth of the Star Fort, the polygonal wonder that replaced the medieval castle. In Italy and France, you'd find entire fortresses spread like snowflakes, angular and low to the ground, wrapped in moats that were less about romance and more about ricochet control. But not everyone surrendered the old style so quickly. Across England, Scotland, and Ireland, lords continued building castles well into the 16th century, partly from tradition, partly from pride. You can still see their hybrid creations, half fortress, half showpiece, like Bedtime or Caerphilly. They look strong, but their true purpose had shifted. The new castle was no longer purely about defense. It was about display, power, legacy. You walk through one of those late castles now. Its halls echo a little differently. You notice windows growing wider, staircases grander, fireplaces more ornate. The arrow slits have been replaced by mullioned glass. There are still towers, yes, but they feel decorative, a nod to the past rather than a necessity. The very word, castle, begins to blur. Is it a fortress? A palace? A dream someone built in stone to prove they could? In the distance, thunder rolls again. Cannons have given way to something worse. Organized artillery, siege trains, handheld firearms. By the 17th century, entire armies march with gunpowder as their heartbeat. Still, there's a curious persistence to the medieval mindset. Some builders tried to reinforce old castles with earthworks, thick banks of dirt piled against the walls to absorb cannon fire. You can almost picture it. Centuries of craftsmanship now buried under mud, as if hiding from time itself. The strange irony is that the low, rounded earth fort, built out of panic, would influence modern military design for centuries to come. Even World War I trenches owe their thinking to these experiments. The slope saves lives. The angle deflects death. You wander through what's left of an artillery-damaged tower. One side yawns open, sunlight spilling in like liquid gold. Pigeons flutter out from cracks, startled by your steps. The inner walls reveal layers, mortar, rubble, brick cores, the castle's anatomy exposed. You crouch near a shattered window ledge, picking up a fragment of stone. It's smooth on one side, jagged on the other. You turn it over in your palm and think of the men who built it, never imagining that centuries later, someone would use thunder to destroy their art. One quirky footnote: some late medieval architects refused to give up their love for defense, so they disguised their houses as castles. Thick walls, turrets, even fake arrow slits, a kind of architectural cosplay. You can still see them dotting the English countryside, beautiful, harmless, and completely impractical. In truth, the fall of the castle wasn't just technological, it was psychological. Society itself was changing. Lords didn't need to live behind battlements anymore. They needed to be seen at court, under chandeliers, near the king. And so, the castle's muscles softened into manners. But for a moment, imagine the transition. Picture a mason's apprentice in 1450. His father built towers. Now he's being told to build star-shaped earth mounds. The sound of hammer on stone fading into the dull thud of shovel on dirt. You can almost hear his confusion. He runs his hand across an old wall, maybe the same way you just did, and wonders what it was all for. Even as cannons grew more powerful, the love for castles never faded. In fact, their obsolescence made them even more romantic. By the 18th century, people were deliberately building mock castles again. The follies of wealthy landowners. Fake ruins to decorate their gardens. It's almost funny. Centuries spent building for survival, followed by centuries building for nostalgia. You pass through a gatehouse that's half crumbled, half restored. Somewhere behind the broken stone, ivy curls like green lace. Birds nest where archers once stood. The thunder fades for now, replaced by a gentler sound, rain tapping softly against the stone. You take shelter under an arch and listen to the rhythm. It's slow, soothing. The kind of rain that makes everything smell alive again. The age of gunpowder had rewritten the rules, but the castles didn't vanish. They simply transformed. Some became fortresses adapted for cannons, others became grand estates with chandeliers and manicured lawns. A few, inevitably, turned to ruins, skeletal memories of power, standing proudly in fields where sheep now graze. Historians still argue whether gunpowder was the true cause of their fall, or merely the excuse. But as you run your hand across the damp, ancient wall, you feel that maybe nothing really dies in history. It just changes form, waiting for us to listen again. And so you do. You listen. To thunder, to rain, to the faint echo of masons, gone but not forgotten. The air smells of wet stone and iron. The kind of scent that makes you want to close your eyes and drift, imagining a time when the sky itself was the only ceiling that mattered. The rain slows, softens, and finally stops. You step out from beneath the archway, shoes crunching on gravel slick with water. The air feels washed clean, like the castle has been baptized anew. Beyond the dripping eaves, a bell tolls somewhere. Slow, deliberate, steady. Inside these walls, the rhythm of life and law continues, because even as the world changed outside, castles had their own private rules. You wander across the courtyard, noticing the subtler scars, not from cannons or fire, but from people. Grooves worn into stairs by centuries of boots. Deep scratches in door lintels where swords once hung. Places where the stone looks oddly polished. The work of hands, of brushing shoulders, of repetition. This was more than a fortress. It was a world unto itself, governed by its own order. Sometimes fair, sometimes terrifying. Every castle was both shield and cage. The lord ruled within these walls with absolute authority, but also with crushing responsibility. He dispensed justice, collected taxes, and settled disputes in the Great Hall. Imagine that room alive, tapestries fluttering in the draught, servants scurrying, peasants bowing nervously, and the lord himself seated in a high, backed chair beneath his banner. Justice was often a public spectacle, half ceremony, half warning. You would stand before your lord and plead your case, and his judgment was final. There were no juries, no appeals, just his word. Sometimes, justice meant hanging, sometimes exile, sometimes the stocks in the bailey where everyone could laugh at you while you sat helpless. covered in whatever they decided to throw. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was truly crueler than ours, or just more visible, but it certainly left a mark. And yet, within these harsh walls, there were also rules of mercy. Lords often pardoned first-time thieves, especially in winter when hunger made desperate men bold. Churchmen intervened, too, claiming sanctuary for fugitives who reached the chapel before capture. You can almost hear their frantic footsteps echoing up the spiral stairs to safety. You pause at a small doorway leading into the old guardroom. Inside, a few rusted hooks still cling to the wall. You imagine soldiers sitting here in the dim light, dicing for coins, sharpening blades, and gossiping about the Lord's latest orders. The castle wasn't just ruled from the top. It was a living network of power and duty. The constable oversaw security, the steward handled money and supplies, the chaplain kept records and souls in order. Beneath them, a whole ecosystem of servants, guards, and craftsmen kept the walls humming. And below even them, the invisible heartbeat prisoners. Every castle had its dungeons, though the word dungeon originally just meant the keep, the central tower. Over time, it came to mean something darker, the underbelly of power. You descend into a low, damp chamber beneath the floor. The air thickens instantly. The walls glisten with moisture. The ceiling drips rhythmically. Chains still hang from iron rings embedded in the stone. The air smells of rust and memory. Imagine being locked here in the 13th century. No light, except a flickering torch when food was delivered. No sound but your own heartbeat and the distant creak of floors above. Some cells were used for debtors or traitors. Others for political enemies the Lord preferred not to kill publicly. A famous legend claims that in one English castle, a man imprisoned for years carved the entire Lord's Prayer into the wall with a spoon. Each letter deep enough to outlast the man himself. You trace the wall in the dark, half expecting to find such devotion there. Faith etched into stone, defiance turned into art. You climb back up, blinking at the sudden light. Outside, the courtyard feels wider, the air easier to breathe. You pass through the great hall again, and notice something you missed before: painted walls, traces of color in the shadows. Castles weren't as grey as movies make them seem. They were alive with color, bright reds, blues, and golds, banners flapping in the air, shields gleaming above doors. The laws may have been harsh, but life inside had its rhythms, its laughter. Everyday danger existed, right beside everyday comfort. The kitchen, for example, was a place of fire and feast, but also constant peril. Flames leapt high in open hearths. Servants carried pots big enough to drown in. Boiling fat, heavy cleavers, smoke thick enough to sting the eyes. All part of the daily bullet of survival. Yet out of this came meals fit for legend: whole roasted boars, honey, glazed pheasants, meat pies stuffed with spices from across the world. The scent must have filled the corridors like music. You imagine the Lord's table, at supper silver goblets reflecting candlelight, dogs waiting underfoot for scraps, musicians playing lutes softly in the background. For a moment, even the servants paused to watch, because this, right here, was power on display. But outside those walls, peasantry and soldiers followed different rules. You picture the soldiers on night watch. 3 men huddled by a brazier, whispering stories to stay awake. They speak of ghosts seen on the battlements, of curses carved into arrow slits, of that one unlucky guard who supposedly saw the Virgin Mary herself walking the ramparts before a siege. Every castle had its legends, some still do, and beneath those stories, an unspoken code loyalty. For all its strictness, castle life was bound by trust. You guarded your lord, he fed your family. You worked the kitchens, she clothed your children. It was brutal, but it was balanced. There's something oddly comforting about that simplicity. Everyone knowing their role, however unfair it might seem from afar. You climb the winding stairs to the parapet again, the view spreading out below. From up here, you see how much the castle ruled, not just by stone, but by visibility. The villagers' fields stretch outward like a map of obedience. Smoke rises from their cottages, a reminder that even when the castle slept, its shadow was always awake. Justice, law, punishment, all these things depended on visibility. You had to be seen to be believed. And that, perhaps, is why the architecture itself feels so commanding. Towers meant to be looked at, gates meant to impress before they intimidate. One scholarly debate that still lingers concerns this very idea. Were castles primarily military fortresses? Or were they instruments of psychological control? Some argue the latter, that the mere sight of a castle was as powerful as its walls. And maybe that's true. You stand there, centuries later, and still feel small beneath its presence. But even here, at the height of power, danger never fully leaves. Accidents happen. Fire spread. Ambition breeds betrayal. There are stories of cooks poisoning lords, of guards falling asleep at their posts and vanishing the next morning, of entire families trapped in their own fortresses by rebellion. The walls kept enemies out. But sometimes, they also kept secrets in. You glance at the horizon. The sky is deepening again, clouds rolling back in. Somewhere below, the chapel bell rings for evening prayer. The castle shifts tone once more, from judgment to devotion. You head down toward the chapel. It's narrow-stained, glass windows glowing faintly with sunset. Inside, the air is cool and sweet with wax. Candles tremble on the altar, their reflections dancing on old stone. A few voices murmur prayers in Latin. This, too, was law. Divine law, the ultimate authority behind every mortal rule. Lords might govern bodies, but priests govern souls. Together, they kept the balance, or at least pretended to. You sit quietly in the back pew, listening to the rhythm of their voices, the creak of benches, the faint flutter of doves outside, the echo of devotion in a place once built for defense. Maybe that's what all this was really about. Not just protection from invasion, but protection from chaos, from the fear that the world beyond the walls could swallow you whole. And for tonight, as you rest your head against the cold wood of the pew and breathe in the incense of centuries, that feeling is enough. The castle still stands. The laws still whisper. The stones still remember. Night settles over the castle like a heavy velvet cloak. The torches are dimmed one by one, until the walls seem to exhale, finally allowed to rest after centuries of holding themselves upright. You walk through the quiet courtyard, where puddles reflect the faint shimmer of the moon. Every sound seems magnified. The rustle of your steps, the sigh of wind through an arrow slit, the soft coo of a pigeon nesting in a ruined tower. The air smells of stone and time. You've been walking through this fortress for so long that it feels like it has become part of you. Or maybe you've become part of it. But even castles, for all their stubborn grandeur, eventually learn how to fade. Once, these walls guarded kings and queens, knights and captives, merchants and priests. But power is fickle, and stone, however eternal it seems, cannot outlast purpose. By the late Middle Ages, as the world turned toward trade, cities, and bureaucracy, castles began to lose their meaning. They stood tall but hollow, like old monarchs outliving their own thrones. Some were abandoned entirely. Their roofs collapsed, their courtyards swallowed by weeds. Others were transformed, reborn as manor houses or prisons, depending on what the times demanded. You walk into a wide hall that has been both banquet room and dungeon, chapel and armory. The air carries faint traces of each role. Smoke in the beams, incense in the cracks, rust in the corners. Historians still argue whether castles died naturally or were simply repurposed into something else. But you can sense the truth here. They never really die. They just change their masks. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Noble families refashioned their castles into symbols of refinement. Moats were drained, walls smoothed, gardens sculpted into symmetry. You can almost see a lady in silk gliding through a former guardroom, now lined with tapestries. Her perfume mingles with the old ghost of tallow smoke, and somehow, both belong. Later, during wars and revolutions, many of these grand homes became prisons or barracks. The same walls that once defended honor now confined it. Iron bars were fitted into windows, cannon emplacements filled with soldiers who didn't even know the names of those who built them. You run your fingers along a scarred wall. There's graffiti scratched into the stone. A date, a name, a crude heart pierced by an arrow. The handwriting could be from a prisoner, a soldier, or just a bored 19th century tourist with a penknife. Each line is a reminder that time leaves signatures too. The industrial age arrived, and with it, the age of nostalgia. Ruins became romantic. Painters, poets, and lovers all came here seeking melancholy beauty. What was once a fortress became a backdrop for longing. Ivy was allowed to spread unchecked, because decay itself became fashionable. You imagine the scene, a 19th century painter sitting in the grass, sketchbook open, capturing the broken tower silhouetted against a stormy sky. He's not painting war or power. He's painting memory. There's something touching about that. Humans, it seems, cannot help but fall in love with their own ruins. Even today, castles remain alive in ways their builders could never have imagined. Tourists with smartphones take selfies in rooms where knights once whispered confessions. Archaeologists uncover lost kitchens, old latrines, and the occasional forgotten coin. Restoration teams rebuild walls stone by stone, sometimes guided by drones and lasers. And yet, the hum is the same. The air still moves the same way through arrow slits. The walls still hold their breath during storms. You step outside again, where moonlight spills across the grass. The ruin stretches before you. Quiet, patient, proud. You can see the layers now, each century stacked upon the last like the rings of a tree. Every generation has left its fingerprint here. Masons, soldiers, prisoners, tourists, dreamers. You sit on a fallen block of stone, feeling its chill seep through your clothes. Somewhere nearby, a small animal rustles in the grass, unbothered by history. You take a deep breath. The night smells faintly of moss, lime, and rain. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the old sounds rising through the dark. Hammers echoing, gates clanging, laughter from the great hall, the bell for curfew ringing out one last time. The castle has become many things: fortress, palace, ruin, museum, but most of all, it has become a story. And you've been walking through it, listening to the echoes of its genius design. From its foundation trenches to its final sigh. Maybe that's what true endurance means. Not just to survive, but to keep being remembered. To remain part of the dreams of those who come after. You glance up at the tower one last time. The moonlight clings to it like silver dust. It doesn't feel lonely. Exactly. Just thoughtful. Watching. And you, tired now, can finally rest beside it. Wind down 300 words. The air grows still. The crickets start their quiet chorus beyond the walls, and the last of the torchlight fades into a single flicker. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the night. The stone beneath you feels smoother now, almost warm from the memory of so many who leaned against it before. You close your eyes, and the centuries seem to drift backward, gently, like a tide. The builders at work, the clang of iron, the hum of the lime kiln, the Lord's voice in the great hall. Then quieter still, the murmur of prayers, the whisper of silk, the creak of empty stairs. All of it softens, folding into silence. Castles, like people, were never meant to last forever. They were meant to witness, to shelter, to remind. The walls around you are still doing exactly that, keeping safe the echoes of everything that mattered. A breeze brushes your face, cool, clean, steady. You imagine it moving through every corridor, every ruin, every story left behind. You can rest now, too. You've walked through ages of invention and decay, through thunder and rain, through lore and legend. The journey has been long, but the night is kind. Let your mind wander a little longer over the stones. Let the sounds fade. Let the past grow quiet. Soon, there is nothing but the hum of the world, the rhythm of your own breath, and the gentle awareness that somewhere, under the same moon, another castle still stands, still listening, still dreaming. Good night, traveler. Sleep well within these ancient walls.